She aimed her rifle at the stranger holding a baby, but the moment he whispered her dead daughter's name, her hands began to tremble. The wind howled like a wounded wolf, clawing at the wooden walls of the small cabin nestled deep in the Wyoming wilderness. Snowflakes slapped the windows, desperate to get in, but the fire inside crackled in defiance. Abigail Kane sat stiffly in her rocking chair, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the door like she was waiting for trouble. And maybe she was. It had been a long winter. Too long. The kind where silence screamed and loneliness carved itself into your bones. Her nearest neighbor was 6 miles away, and she hadn't seen another soul in over 2 weeks, until that knock. It came at midnight, a single knock. Not frantic, not hesitant. Just one heavy, deliberate thump. Her breath caught. No one should be out in this storm. No sane man would travel these woods in this blizzard, especially not at midnight. Her fingers tightened around the rifle. Another knock. Then silence. Abigail rose slowly, every board under her boots creaking like it was warning her. She moved to the door and placed her eye to the peephole her late husband had carved years ago. At first, she saw nothing but a blur of white.
Snow, then a shape. A man. No, a man holding something. Her heart jumped.
She pulled the door open just a crack, the wind slapping her face instantly. The man stood there, swaying slightly, face half covered in frost and shadow. He wore a long duster coat, tattered and soaked through. His hair was wild, dark and frozen, at the edges, but it wasn't his appearance that made her raise her rifle. It was what he held, a baby, wrapped in a thin blanket, barely moving. "Don't move," Abigail snapped, lifting her rifle to his chest. "Put the child down." He didn't flinch, didn't beg. He simply looked at her with hollow eyes that had seen too much. Then, in a voice so hoarse it sounded like it had been scraped across gravel, he whispered, "Her name is Hope. Just like your daughter." The rifle slipped in her hands. Her blood ran cold because no one knew her daughter's name. No one had said it aloud in 3 years. And that man, he looked like he was about to fall. If this first part gave you chills, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and tell us in the comments, what do you think he's hiding? Snow blasted through the doorway as Abigail stood frozen, the rifle limp in her hands. The man didn't move, but she could see his knees wobble like a man who'd been on his feet too long in a war that wouldn't end. Her daughter's name, Hope. No one had said that name since the day she was buried beneath the willow tree out back, wrapped in her favorite blue dress. The name hit Abigail like a slap, like God himself had yanked her out of her numbness. "I asked you a question," she snapped, voice shaking more from memory than fear. "Who the hell are you?" The man blinked slowly, his lips cracked and turning blue. "Let me in. Or she'll die," he whispered, glancing down at the bundle in his arms. "And you too. Maybe." The second part wasn't a threat. It sounded like a prophecy. Abigail hesitated, but instinct kicked in. She swung the door open just enough to yank them both inside, then slammed it shut against the storm. The man staggered forward and collapsed to his knees, the child still, cradled carefully in his arms. Abigail caught the baby before he hit the floor. She was lighter than she should have been, her skin ice cold. She wasn't crying. "God," Abigail muttered, rushing to the fireplace. She unwrapped the child, with trembling fingers, and gasped. The baby girl was no older than 3 months, her tiny face pale, lips tinged with blue. But her chest rose, barely, still breathing. Abigail threw a wool blanket around the child and held her close to the fire. She grabbed the kettle and poured a few drops of warm milk onto a spoon, gently pressing it to the baby's lips. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a twitch, a swallow. "She's fighting," Abigail whispered, her voice cracking. She turned to the man. He was slumped against the wall, eyes half closed, hands trembling like leaves in the wind. "What's your name?" she demanded. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, with the kind of weariness that only comes from dragging sorrow across miles of frozen earth, he muttered, "Used to be Daniel Bishop, but not anymore." Abigail narrowed her eyes. That name. It scratched at the edges of her memory, like a song you half remember in a dream. But before she could ask more, he passed out cold. She stared at him, heart pounding, rifle still leaning against the wall. A stranger with a baby, a dead daughter's name, and a man who used to be someone else. Something about this felt too planned, too specific, and Abigail Kane knew one thing for sure. No one shows up in the middle of a blizzard by accident. The cabin was quiet, save for the low groan of the storm outside and the occasional crackle of the fire. Abigail sat on the floor, baby swaddled against her chest, eyes never leaving the unconscious man slumped near her rocking chair. Daniel Bishop. The name itched at her like a splinter under skin. She hadn't heard it in years, but it stirred something dark in the back of her memory. Something tied to headlines and hushed whispers in the general store. Her hand moved to the rifle again. She kept it close even as the baby warmed slowly against her chest. The little girl, Hope, had started breathing more steadily now. Abigail felt the rhythm, light but present, like a drum calling her back to life. It was impossible, almost cruel to hear that name again and hold it in her arms. 3 years ago, Abigail had held another Hope in this very cabin. The fever took her in a single night. She'd buried her daughter with her own 2 hands, her husband too sick with grief to help. The pain had never left her. It just got quieter with time. And now, this. A knock at midnight. A baby with her daughter's name. And a man, claiming to be someone who, if she remembered right, was wanted for murder in 3 counties. She rose slowly and walked to a shelf in the corner, pulling out an old yellowed copy of the Cheyenne Ledger. Her fingers flipped through the pages until she found it. Ex-deputy turned outlaw. Daniel Bishop still at large, accused of betrayal, theft, and murder of federal witness. Abigail's breath caught. Same name. Same eyes. The sketch didn't show the frostbite, the scars, or the years he wore on his face now, but it was him. Or had been. Her heart thudded louder than the wind outside. She turned back to the man, who was now beginning to stir. His lips parted, breath shallow. Then his eyes snapped open, wild and confused. Where's the child?" he rasped. "With me," Abigail answered coldly. "You said her name is Hope. Why?" He sat up with difficulty, rubbing his temples. "Because that's what her mother called her." "And who was her mother?" His eyes dropped to the floor. After a long silence, he muttered, "Her name was Rebecca. Rebecca Kane." Abigail's knees went weak. "That was my sister's name." Daniel looked up slowly, his expression twisting with something between recognition and guilt. "She told me to bring her here if anything ever happened." Abigail's heart thundered in her chest. "Rebecca died 10 years ago," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "She didn't. She just wanted you to think she had." Outside, the wind wailed like a ghost crying through the pines, and Abigail Kane realized this man hadn't come to her by accident. He'd come to unbury the past. The fire snapped sharply, like it was angry at what had just been said. Abigail sat motionless, her arms tightening around the infant now peacefully sleeping on her chest. The air between her and Daniel was thick, with grief, questions, and the kind of truth that feels like a knife. "She told you to bring the baby here?" Abigail's voice was low, steady, but laced with disbelief. Daniel nodded, wincing as he tried to sit straighter. His shirt stuck to the gash on his side, blood crusted and dark. She made me swear. Before... His voice broke off. Abigail narrowed her eyes. Before what? Daniel looked into the fire. The flickering light cast shadows across his face, carving lines of sorrow deeper into his features. She wasn't supposed to die. He said it like a confession, like it weighed more than all the snow on the roof. You're going to have to do better than that, Abigail snapped. Daniel drew a shaking breath. Rebecca found me in Elkhorn 5 years ago. I was already running by then, already broken. She nursed me back, gave me a reason to stop looking over my shoulder. He gave a bitter smile. She always had a way of finding the people the world forgot. Abigail swallowed hard. Why didn't she come here? Why didn't she ever write? She wanted to, Daniel whispered. She tried. But you were still with Elijah then, weren't you? Abigail flinched. Her late husband. The man she once believed was strong, honest, godly. Before he changed. Before grief turned him cruel. She thought he'd never let you answer, Daniel said. She said if he ever found out where she was, He looked away. She was terrified of him, Abby. Abigail stared at the man like he'd just peeled the roof off her life. You're lying. I wish I was. Silence again. Then Daniel's jaw tightened. 3 weeks ago, someone came looking for me, a bounty crew. But they weren't just after gold. They knew about Rebecca. Said she was leverage. Abigail's blood ran cold. She tried to run, Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper now. I told her to take the baby. Told her to head north, to the safe trail. But she doubled back for me. Always trying to save people. He shut his eyes. They shot her. She bled. Out in my arms. Abigail gasped, covering her mouth. The pain in his voice wasn't fake. It couldn't be. You were supposed to protect her, she hissed, voice cracking. I know, he choked. I failed her. Abigail stood, holding the child tighter. The fire popped behind her, casting her in silhouette. She trusted you. I know. You brought her baby here. Why? Daniel looked up, broken and bare. Because this is the only place left that ever meant something to her. She said if she died, her daughter should grow up with hope, not secrets. Abigail stared at him, tears streaming silently now, and just as she turned away, baby still in her arms, Daniel whispered, I buried her myself. Under the same tree you buried your daughter. The room spun. Abigail's legs gave way. She dropped to her knees on the floor, sobbing, not even feeling the heat of the fire anymore. 2 graves, 2 sisters, and the past. Finally unearthed. Abigail didn't sleep that night. She sat near the hearth, baby tucked close to her chest, and Daniel dozing weakly by the wall, his breath raspy. But her mind kept turning. The tree. The grave. Rebecca. Each thought felt like ice-cold nails against her chest. The man who had once ridden with a badge, then betrayed it, had now brought her the only piece of her sister left in the world. But why? Her why now? Why not years ago, when Rebecca was still alive and Abigail was drowning in grief? She looked at Daniel again, unconscious now, one arm across his stomach. Even injured, even exhausted, he kept twitching, haunted by dreams she couldn't see. She rose quietly and walked to the far side of the cabin, past the kitchen, past the old rifle rack, toward a creaky floorboard only she and her sister had ever known about. She knelt, pulled it up. Inside, a small bundle of letters tied with twine, and one envelope resting on top, yellowed and brittle with time. On the front, in Rebecca's handwriting, if anything happens to me, give this to Abigail. Abigail's fingers trembled. She slid, the envelope open. The parchment inside was stained with time, and a corner had been nibbled by mice. But the words were there, scrawled in ink, rushed, but unmistakably Rebecca. Dear Abby, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was too afraid. I didn't run because I wanted to disappear. I ran because I had no choice. Elijah found out about me and Daniel, and he said if I ever showed my face near you again, he'd kill us both. Abigail froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She reread it. Again. And again. Elijah, her husband, the church deacon, the man of God who'd buried their daughter with her. He had known, and he'd lied every time she wept for her. Sister, he'd told her Rebecca was reckless, wild, selfish. He'd made her believe she had no one, but he knew, and he threatened her sister into silence. Tears slipped down Abigail's cheeks, not from sadness this time, but from rage. The letter went on, Daniel saved me. When I had no one, he kept me safe. I know what the papers say about him, I don't care. He never once raised a hand to me. Elijah did. You just never saw it. If something happens to me, trust him. Please, for Hope's sake. Abigail pressed the paper to her chest. Hope stirred softly in her arms, her tiny hand curling near Abigail's heart. The snowstorm outside was finally weakening, but the storm inside her was only just beginning. She stood slowly, walked to Daniel, and, with a sharp voice that shook the stillness, she said, You should have given me this the moment you walked in. Daniel blinked awake, confused. What? She held up the letter. Don't pretend you forgot it was there. He stared at her, then dropped his eyes. I didn't think you'd believe it. I didn't believe you. Her eyes burned. But I believe her. Silence. Then, just above a whisper, Daniel said, I think I'm not the only one who buried the truth in this house. And Abigail knew. Her past with Elijah was about to unravel more than she ever expected. The wind had settled outside, but inside the cabin, the storm still raged. Abigail stood stiff, letter clenched in one hand, firelight flickering across her face. Her voice was low, steady, but beneath it was a rage that had been waiting for years. You could have told me Elijah was the reason Rebecca left. Daniel, still lying against the wall, tried to sit up, but winced from the wound. Would you have believed me? Back then? I would have fought for her, Abigail snapped. I wouldn't have let her vanish thinking she was the villain. Daniel looked at her, eyes heavy with guilt. She didn't want you pulled into it. Abigail's lip trembled. She pulled me into it the day she died. The room went quiet. Then, from outside, a crunch. Boots on snow. Abigail froze. Daniel's hand instinctively reached for the shotgun leaning against the hearth, but he was too slow. Abigail handed the baby to him. Stay quiet. She moved to the window and parted the curtain. A man stood in the clearing, coat flapping in the breeze, hat low over his eyes. His horse pawed nervously at the ground behind him, and in his hand, he held a silver-plated revolver, not drawn. Just resting, but Abigail's heart still stopped. She knew that gun, knew it better than she knew her own reflection, the initials etched on the barrel. The custom grip, the polished metal that caught the moonlight just right. It belonged to Elijah's brother. She stepped outside, snow crunching underfoot, heart pounding louder than her boots. The man tipped his hat, revealing a face worn by years of sun and sin. Scar over one brow, teeth clenched. Abigail. Carter, she whispered. He smiled cold. Didn't think you'd recognize me. You shouldn't be here. He tilted his head. Funny, that's what they told me when I got out of Yuma prison last month. Her blood turned to ice. Carter had been arrested 10 years ago, armed robbery, assault, suspected in a church fire that killed 2 innocents. But they never proved the fire. Still, Abigail always believed he was gone for good. He stepped closer. Came to see my brother. Thought maybe he was still around. He's dead, Abigail said flatly. Carter nodded, as if he already knew. Yeah, funny thing though. His name's been coming up a lot. Even heard it whispered out in Elkhorn, right before your sister died. Abigail's chest tightened. What do you want? I want the truth. He looked past her toward the cabin. And I want the man who put a bullet in my partner. Abigail stepped between him and the door. You're not getting either. Carter's grin twisted. You always were stubborn, and you always were a snake. The wind picked up again, howling low like a warning. Carter looked down at the snow, then back up. You're hiding something in there, Abby, and I ain't leaving till I find out what. Before she could answer, a sharp click echoed from behind her. Daniel stood in the doorway, bloody, pale, holding the shotgun with shaking arms. She's not hiding anything, he growled. But I am. Carter smirked. Well, I'll be damned. Daniel stepped forward, pain etched into every motion. I killed your partner, he said. Abigail turned, shocked. Daniel's voice cracked. Because he shot Rebecca. Daniel stood in the doorway, the shotgun trembling in his hands. His shirt was still stained with blood, his face pale as death. But his eyes were locked on Carter like a man ready to die again. I killed your partner, he repeated, voice hoarse, because he shot Rebecca. Carter didn't move, didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just smiled. Slow, crooked, dangerous. Well now, he drawled. Ain't that something? After all these years, you finally admit it. Abigail stood between them, her arms outstretched like she could stop a bullet with her bare hands. He was protecting Rebecca. That man came to her ranch drunk and angry, screaming about debts owed. He would have killed her. Carter cocked his head. Maybe. But last I checked, dead men don't give their side of the story. Daniel's voice cracked. He wasn't just a man, he was a monster, just like Elijah. Carter's smile vanished, his jaw clenched tight. He stepped forward, boots crunching the snow beneath him. Careful how you speak my brother's name. Daniel didn't move. I speak it like a man who knew what he did behind church doors, like a man who saw the bruises he left on the women who dared say no. Your brother was no preacher, he was a coward. The silence that followed was thicker than the snow beneath their feet. Carter's hand hovered near his holster. Maybe so, but he was still blood. And Rebecca was mine, Abigail said sharply. Both men looked at her. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was firm. She begged me to leave Elijah. Told me the things he said to her. The way he cornered her in the barn one night when you were away. She looked at Carter. You think I didn't see the fear in her eyes when she ran? You think I didn't know? Carter's face twitched. Something cracked in him, a memory maybe, a truth long buried, but then he hardened again. Don't matter. You kill a man, you pay. That's the code. No, Abigail said, stepping closer. That's your code, not mine, not Rebecca's. Daniel lowered the shotgun. I'll go, he said. If that's what it takes, I'll leave. Take the blame. Just don't hurt her. Don't hurt Hope. Abigail turned to him, horrified. What are you doing? But Daniel looked only at Carter. You want revenge. Fine, but you won't get it here. You'll get it out there. One rider, one man, me and you. Carter grinned again. You ain't in no shape to duel. I'm in good enough shape to make you bleed. Silence. Then Carter said something no one expected. He didn't shoot her. Daniel blinked. What? Carter stared at him cold. My partner. He didn't shoot Rebecca. He wasn't even near that ranch that day. Abigail's breath caught. Then who? Carter stepped forward, lips curling. I came here for the truth, Daniel. Not to kill you. Not yet. Because the man who really pulled the trigger is still out there. Daniel. Swayed, Abigail whispered. Then why say you came for revenge? Carter raised a brow. Because I wanted to see if you'd lie. He turned and walked away, spurs clinking, moonlight catching the etching on his revolver as snowflakes began falling again. You didn't kill my partner, he said over his shoulder, but you did bury something worse. Abigail sat alone beside the fire after Carter left, the baby asleep in her lap, and Daniel dozing fitfully on the cot. Snow fell outside in thick, whispering sheets, wrapping the cabin in silence. But her mind screamed. Carter's words echoed, like a hammer on steel. You didn't kill my partner, but you did bury something worse. What had Daniel buried, and more importantly, why did Rebecca die for it? She rose slowly, careful not to wake the child, and walked to the satchel Daniel had arrived with. It was still resting near the hearth, crusted with snow and blood. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, beneath the folded shirt and a small revolver wrapped in cloth, was something odd. An envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with a wax stamp she hadn't seen in years. It bore her family crest, her father's. The sight of it hit her like a blow. Her father had died years ago in a hunting accident. Or so they told her. Abigail sat down by the table and broke the seal with a flick of her thumb. The handwriting inside was shaky, unfamiliar, but the signature at the bottom was unmistakable. General Everett Monroe, her father, the man who raised her with the Bible in one hand and a riding crop in the other. The letter was addressed not to her, but to someone named E.L. Elijah. Abigail's stomach twisted. You were right, the letter read. About the child. She isn't yours. But you must never tell her. Or Rebecca. The truth would destroy what little we have left. Abigail's eyes widened. She reread it twice, 3 times. If you want your silence bought, I'll make sure the deeds to the land are transferred. But you stay away from Rebecca, you hear me? She's the only decent thing I have left. Don't ruin her too. Abigail's hand dropped to the table. The world spun. Rebecca's child wasn't Elijah's, and her father had known all along. She turned to Daniel. You knew. His eyes fluttered open. What? You knew this letter was in your satchel. He sat up slowly, wincing. I found it the day before I came here. You should have shown me. Daniel looked away. I was going to, but I needed to be sure you were ready. Ready? She whispered. To find out my sister was blackmailed into staying with a man she hated? Daniel's voice was low. I think Rebecca was protecting someone, not just herself. Abigail paced. Who? The baby? Me? Who else was there? Daniel looked at her and said a name she hadn't heard in 10 years. Micah. She froze. Micah's dead. Daniel's eyes didn't move. You sure about that? The candle by the window flickered as the wind shifted. A shadow passed just outside, and then came a knock. 3 slow, heavy raps. The knock echoed like a rifle shot through the cabin. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Abigail stood frozen. Daniel sat up straighter on the cot, pale and tense. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to die down, as if bracing for whatever stood beyond that door. She whispered, Who would knock like that in a storm? Daniel didn't answer. He was already reaching for the shotgun leaning by the wall. Abigail walked to the door with stiff legs, her fingers brushing against the handle. The baby stirred behind her, letting out a soft whimper, and that sound alone gave her the courage to pull it open. And there he stood, covered in snow, a long coat wrapped tightly around him, his beard unshaven, hair longer than it had ever been. But those eyes, blue, cold, familiar. Micah, she breathed, her knees buckled. He caught her before she fell. I thought, they said, I know, he murmured, voice rough. They all did. Daniel stepped into the doorway behind her, jaw clenched tight. How the hell are you alive? Micah's eyes narrowed when they landed on him. You got a lot of nerve standing here, Daniel. I buried you myself, Daniel growled. You were shot. In the shoulder, Micah interrupted. Passed out from blood loss. They thought I was gone, left me in a ditch. A trapper found me 3 days later. Abigail couldn't stop staring at him. But why? Why didn't you come back? Micah's jaw tightened. I was going to. I even got as far as the valley ridge, But then I heard what happened, that Rebecca was dead, and that Carter was blaming Daniel for it. And then I heard something else. Daniel spoke, his voice sharp. What did you hear? Micah looked straight at him. That Elijah didn't just beat Rebecca. He tried to claim Hope as his own, and your silence let it happen. Daniel stepped forward. Don't you put that on me? Abigail shouted. Enough! Both men stopped. She looked between them, heart hammering in her chest. Micah, Rebecca's gone, and we're standing here chasing ghosts. Micah's eyes softened just for a second. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He laid it gently on the table, unrolling it slowly. It was a locket, Rebecca's locket. Inside was a sketch, a drawing of 2 little girls, one with light hair, one dark. Handwritten beneath them, it said, For my angels, Abigail and Hope. Tears filled Abigail's eyes. Where did you get this? Micah's voice cracked. She gave it to me, right before. She died. Daniel's eyes burned. You were there? I was too late, Micah whispered, but not too far to hear her scream. Abigail took a step back, breath caught in her throat. Then you know who really shot her? Micah nodded once, and then he whispered the name that shattered the room. Micah's voice was barely a whisper. Elijah Monroe. The name fell like a gunshot in the cabin. Abigail staggered back, hand covering her mouth. Daniel gripped the edge of the table like the world had tilted beneath him. Micah looked down, jaw clenched. He killed her. I saw it. No. Abigail shook her head, slowly. You must be wrong. He was her husband. My sister, she stayed with him till the end. That doesn't make it love, Micah said, eyes burning. She stayed out of fear and guilt. Daniel spoke through clenched teeth. You saw it happen? I was tracking her, Micah confessed. She sent me a message through a ranch. Hand. Said she had something to tell me. Something about the baby. Abigail's knees buckled again, and she sank into the nearest chair. She was going to leave him, Micah continued. We were supposed to meet. She never came. I went looking, and I found her body in the river gorge. Abigail gasped, her heart shattering all over again. I thought she fell. No. Micah pulled out a torn strip of fabric from his coat pocket. This was clutched in her hand, part of Elijah's coat. He tossed it on the table like a damning verdict. Daniel stepped forward slowly, shaking his head. I saw Elijah that night. His hand was bleeding. He said it was a barbed wire accident. I didn't question it. Micah's eyes narrowed. And that's why you buried the truth. To protect a man who beat her. No, Daniel said quietly. I buried her because she asked me to. She was still alive when I found her, barely breathing. She begged me not to tell anyone, said it would destroy everything. Micah stared. At him, disbelief etched across his face. Destroy who? Abigail demanded. Me? The baby? Or him? Daniel looked at her, pain raw in his eyes. She said, Elijah wasn't the father. She didn't say who was. Abigail's breath caught. Terrible thought crept into her mind. Her eyes darted between the 2 men. Micah, she whispered. Were you the father? Micah's expression turned to stone. He didn't answer. Abigail rose from her chair, voice trembling. Tell me the truth. Did you and Rebecca? Micah finally met her eyes. Yes, the word was simple, quiet, but it hit like thunder. I loved her, he added, voice breaking. I wanted to take her away, but she said she couldn't. She said it would kill her father if the truth came out. Tears spilled down Abigail's face. So you left, and she stayed in hell. She stayed to protect you, Daniel said, suddenly. Not herself, Micah turned sharply. What? She told me just before she died that if the truth about Hope's parentage got out, Abigail would be in danger. She said Elijah wouldn't survive the scandal and he'd take everyone down with him. Abigail covered her face. The locket, the letter, the blood on Elijah's coat. It all fit now. Elijah Monroe, her own father, had killed Rebecca to protect his name. "I need air," she whispered. She stepped outside, the cold night biting at her skin. Above her, the stars were hidden behind clouds. Behind her, the two men who once loved her sister stood in silence, divided by guilt and grief. She stood there a long while, tears freezing to her cheeks. And then, slowly, the snow began to fall again. Each flake whispered her sister's name. The snow had stopped by morning, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the storm. Abigail stood at the ridge overlooking the valley, a thick cloak wrapped around her, the baby swaddled tightly against her chest. She had not slept. Couldn't. Not after what she'd heard, Rebecca's murder, the truth about Hope, and worst of all, the man who did it was still out there, living free, wearing a sheriff's badge, Elijah Monroe, her father. No, a monster wearing the skin of a father. Behind. Micah was saddling his horse. Daniel stood nearby, his face unreadable, eyes dark as a gun barrel. "I'm going," Abigail said, her voice cold and steady. "With or without either of you." Daniel looked at her. "You think walking into town and pointing a finger will fix this?" "No," she said. "But telling the truth might start something that does." Micah stepped forward. "He has the town in his pocket, Abigail. Preacher, mayor, even half the damn ranchers. You accuse him, you better be ready to fight the whole town." She stared at him, eyes hard. "Then I'll fight." Daniel's jaw twitched. "He'll kill you." "He already killed my sister," she said. "If I die telling the truth, at least someone in this family finally did." Micah sighed and swung into the saddle. "Then let's ride." Daniel hesitated for a second, then grabbed his rifle and followed. They rode down into Willow Creek just past noon. The town looked peaceful on the surface, but Abigail could feel it. The tension, the eyes behind curtains, the whispers trailing their boots as they walked down the boardwalk toward the sheriff's office. It felt like walking into a trap. Abigail clutched the baby to her chest, her other hand trembling beneath her cloak. Not with fear, but fury. They pushed open the door to the sheriff's office, and there he was, Elijah Monroe. Sitting behind the desk, drinking coffee like nothing in the world was broken. His gray mustache twitched when he looked up. "Well, look what the storm blew in," he said, setting the cup down. "Micah, back from the dead. And Abigail, sweetheart, I was worried sick." Abigail's voice shook, but she held her ground. "I know what you did." Elijah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you?" "You killed her," she said. "You killed Rebecca. And you tried to bury it like one of your secrets." He stood slowly. "Be careful, girl. You're talking like a woman unhinged." "She died in the gorge," she said, her voice louder now. "Holding a piece of your coat. She wrote me a letter, gave Micah her locket. We have proof." Elijah chuckled darkly. "Proof? In a town that bends to my word? You got fire? I'll give you that. But fire don't win fights. Power does." Daniel stepped forward. "You don't have power anymore. You've got blood on your hands, and the whole damn town's about to see it." Elijah's face twisted. "You think they'll side with you? After what you did in Abilene? After what Micah is? Outlaws, drifters, no names? I built this town." Abigail took a deep breath and slowly lowered the blanket from the baby's face. "This is Hope," she said softly. Elijah's eyes faltered. "She's not yours," Abigail continued. "And maybe that's what made you snap. Maybe you couldn't handle the truth, but it doesn't change what you did." Micah growled. "She's mine. And if you ever come near her again, I'll bury you myself." For the first time, Elijah looked uncertain. "You don't get to rewrite history," he snapped. "No," Abigail said, stepping closer. "But we're about to write the truth. On every barn wall and church door from here to Cheyenne." She leaned in, her voice like a blade. "You're done." As they turned to leave, Elijah called after them. "You won't make it out of town alive." Micah didn't even turn. "Then you'd better shoot us in the back. That's the only way you ever win." The three of them walked out together, into the street, into the cold, into the truth. And from behind lace curtains and saloon windows, the people began to notice. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into questions, and somewhere deep in the heart of Willow Creek, the wind began to change. By nightfall, the streets of Willow Creek weren't quiet anymore. They were humming with fear. The news had spread faster than wildfire. That Abigail Monroe, the daughter of the sheriff himself, had walked into town and accused him of murder. Not whispered it in some dark saloon corner, but said it to his face with the whole town listening. And worse, she had proof. The old hands at the saloon whispered behind poker cards. The church ladies clutched their pearls. The blacksmith stopped hammering mid-swing. Something was changing. In Willow Creek, and it smelled like gunpowder. Inside the boarding house, Abigail paced the wooden floor while Micah and Daniel secured every window and door. Hope slept on the bed wrapped in 3 layers of quilts, unaware that the world around her was threatening to tear itself apart. Micah loaded his revolver, hands steady. "He won't let this go." Daniel looked out the window. "He doesn't. Have to. He owns half the men with rifles in this town. We poked the bear, and now it's waking up angry." Abigail stopped pacing. "We've got to get the letter to someone outside town. Someone he can't reach." Daniel nodded. "The telegraph operator's a decent man. We give him the letter and enough coin to send it to Cheyenne. A real judge might care." Micah looked up. "You think we'll live long enough for that?" Before either could answer, a sound, boots, dozens, on dirt, marching, then a shout from outside. "Abigail Monroe, bring yourself out, or we'll come in." Abigail's blood ran cold. Micah snatched Hope from the bed and placed her gently in Abigail's arms. "Go! Through the back! Now!" "But go!" Daniel unlatched the back window just as gunfire tore through the front wall. Boards exploded. Lamps shattered. The house roared with chaos. Micah fired once, twice, dropping 2 silhouettes on the porch. Abigail slipped through the back with Hope bundled to her chest, heart thudding like a war drum. Daniel followed, rifle raised, eyes darting. Every alley looked like a trap. Every shadow felt like a hand reaching for her throat. They made it to the stables behind the saloon. Horses neighed nervously, spooked by the sounds of battle. "Where's Micah?" Abigail gasped. Daniel looked back toward the burning boarding house. "Buying us time." "No," she said, trying to push past him. "I'm not leaving him." Daniel grabbed her by the shoulders, eyes fierce. "You leave now, or his sacrifice means nothing. You want justice? Get that letter to the wire. Then maybe this town gets saved." She stared at him, tears in her eyes, and nodded. He threw her up into the saddle, handed her the reins. "Ride north. Fast. Don't stop for anything." She took one last look back at the town, at the smoke, the fire, the flickering shadows of a fight she wasn't sure they could win. And then she rode. Meanwhile, inside the flaming house, Micah ducked behind the overturned table, bullets splintering wood around him. He was bleeding, a graze on his arm, nothing fatal. But he was outnumbered. Elijah's men were shooting to kill. No questions, no arrests, just fire and death. Micah rolled to the side, kicked open a fallen chair, and fired back. Another body dropped outside. He wasn't going to make it out of here, he knew that, but if Abigail could escape, if Hope could live, it'd be worth it. At the telegraph station, Abigail burst in, breathless, face streaked with ash. The operator jolted. Up. "Miss Monroe! What on earth?" She slammed the letter down on the desk. "This needs to go to Judge Whitlow in Cheyenne. Right now. I'll pay double." He glanced at the blood on her hands, the child in her arms, the tremble in her voice, and he didn't ask questions. "Yes, ma'am." As he began tapping out the message, Abigail stepped back and looked out the window. Somewhere out there, Micah was still fighting. Daniel too, maybe even dying, all for the truth. She held hope. Tighter. You'll know your mother didn't run, she whispered. She fought. The sky had turned an eerie orange by morning, a mix of sunrise and the smoke still rising from the ashes of the boarding house. The fire had taken most of the structure, but not before Micah had taken 4 of Elijah's men with him. The rest ran when they saw he wouldn't go down easy, but Micah hadn't come out. Abigail stood at the edge of the town's northern ridge, hope cradled in her arms. The child stirred in her sleep, tiny fingers clutching at Abigail's shawl. Behind her, Daniel rode up slow. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. They pulled his body out, he said softly. He was still holding his revolver. Abigail didn't answer. Her breath hitched, but no tears came. She had cried enough for one war. Daniel looked away. He saved us. We owe him everything. She looked toward the horizon, where the telegraph wires disappeared into the hills. If that letter reaches Cheyenne, Micah didn't die for nothing. Daniel shook his head. That letter's gone. But Elijah, he's not done. He handed her a crumpled piece of paper, burned along the edges. Found this nailed to the church door this morning. Abigail opened it. You can run, you can write, but this town belongs to me. E. Monroe. Her hands tightened around the paper. He's declaring war. Daniel nodded. He knows the people are whispering. He knows you shook the ground beneath him. So he's going to make an example of someone. Abigail stared at the town. Who? Daniel hesitated. Me. She turned sharply. What are you talking about? He pulled his collar aside. Branded into his chest, faint and half-healed, was a mark. The same cattle brand Elijah used on thieves caught stealing from his ranch back in the early days. I worked his land when I was 15, Daniel said. He caught me taking leftover. Beans from the cook fire. Branded me like livestock. Told me if I ever spoke, he'd hang me himself. Abigail's voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you ever say anything? I was a kid, and back then, Elijah Monroe was a god in this town. But now, he looked toward the center of Willow Creek. Now I want to bury that god. Abigail's mind raced. They couldn't just ride off, couldn't just hope justice would come. They had to make the town see the truth, and not just through letters, but blood, memory, and voice. We need the people on our side, she said. We need them to remember who they were before they got scared. Daniel looked at her. How? We go back. To what? Face Elijah's men again? She nodded slowly. We go to the saloon. At high noon. And I speak. Daniel raised a brow. You planning to make a speech while he's aiming a rifle at your head? I'm planning, she said, her eyes burning with purpose. To make this town choose. Him or their soul. Later that day, the saloon buzzed like a kicked beehive. Half the town had shown up. Some came for the promise of a scene. Others came because deep down, they remembered Micah and the boy he used to be. The one who helped bury a widow's fence posts when her husband died. The one who bought bread for hungry kids behind these general store. At the center of the crowd stood Abigail. She wore black. Not for show, but for mourning. Daniel stood nearby. His rifle leaned against the bar, quiet but ready. The doors burst open. Elijah Monroe walked in. His boots echoed across the wooden floor. His coat flared like wings, and behind him, 5 armed men. But he wasn't smiling today. Daughter, he said, voice laced with venom. What's the meaning of this circus? Abigail didn't flinch. It's called the truth. Elijah Monroe doesn't answer to barked words from a little girl pretending to be brave. She held up Micah's journal, smoke-stained but intact. You killed him to hide this. He wrote down everything, every name, every deal, every threat. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elijah's eyes narrowed. You think these people care? I think they remember, she said loudly, turning to the crowd. They remember. How you raised taxes until they starved. How you hanged men without trial. How you locked up widows for owing rent. You speak lies. I speak what they whispered in corners for 20 years. The people looked at each other. Something old and angry sparked in their eyes. Elijah reached for his holster, but before he could draw, a gun cocked, loud, echoing. It was Daniel, and he wasn't aiming at Elijah's men, he was aiming at Elijah. The saloon held its breath. A bead of sweat rolled down Elijah's temple as Daniel's rifle stayed trained on his chest. "Put it down, boy," Elijah sneered. "You think you can kill me in front of everyone and walk out alive?" Daniel didn't blink. "You think anyone here would stop me?" Elijah's eyes darted around the room. The crowd stood frozen, but their expressions had changed. No, longer fearful. There was something sharper now. Determined, Abigail stepped between the two men. "No more killing." "He'll just keep coming," Daniel muttered. "You know that." "And you'll become him," she replied. "You put one bullet in him and he dies a martyr. I want him to live and rot in the shame he tried to bury," Elijah growled. "You self-righteous little—" A voice cut through the silence. It came from the back of the room, Mrs. Holloway, gray-haired, frail, with a shawl patched in 3 places. "I remember," she said. "I remember when my son caught you skimming coins from the town church fund. You had him jailed for thievery." Gasps rippled. Then old Henry, the blacksmith, stepped forward. "You told me my tools were taxed property and seized them. During a drought. I lost 3 contracts 'cause of you." Then others. The tailor, the widow from Ash Creek, even the schoolteacher. One by one, their voices rose, layering like the hymn of the condemned, finally set free. Elijah's face paled. "You think I care what you remember?" He spat. "You people have always been weak. Sheep. I built this town." "No," Abigail said. "You bled it dry." She walked to the bar and slammed down Micah's journal. "This book has names, ledgers, secrets, the sheriff's office. In Cheyenne already has a copy. You can't run from this anymore." Elijah's eyes twitched. For a second, the saloon believed he might still draw. His hand hovered near his gun. But then, Sheriff Whitaker stepped inside. He wasn't in uniform, just an old brown duster and worn boots. But he wore a tin star again, pinned to his chest like it had never left. "Elijah Monroe," he called out, voice hard as iron. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, unlawful seizure of property, and the murder of Micah Hale." The room stilled. Elijah laughed. "You old drunk. You think anyone here still respects that badge?" Whitaker didn't answer. But behind him, 2 deputies entered. Real ones. Not Elijah's bought men. And then, something no one expected. Pastor Gideon, once Elijah's quietest ally, stepped forward, placing a hand on Whitaker's shoulder. "He's not alone." Elijah backed away slowly, but the crowd blocked every exit. One by one, the townsfolk surrounded him. No guns, just presence. It was the first time in years Elijah Monroe looked truly cornered. "I'll be out in a week," he hissed as Whitaker cuffed him. "You people don't have the spine to hold me." "We don't need to," Abigail said, stepping close. "The world's bigger than this town now, and you don't control it." As Elijah was dragged out, something strange happened. The saloon door, always swinging closed after violence, this time stayed wide open. Light spilled in, and for the first time in years, no shadow followed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped, behind the hills, Abigail sat by the porch of the old boarding house's remains. Hope played quietly beside her with a wooden doll Micah had carved weeks ago. Daniel joined her, carrying 2 mugs of black coffee. "We did it," he said. "No," she replied gently. "They did." He smiled. "So what now?" "We rebuild," she said. "Maybe not this house, maybe not even this life, but something better." Daniel looked at her. "You staying?" She hesitated. I think I have to. He sat beside her. Then I will, too. Abigail looked out at the town square, where neighbors talked like neighbors again, where the children ran without fear. For the first time, Willow Creek breathed. The jail cell clanged shut with a finality that echoed through the whole of Cheyenne. Elijah Monroe sat on the narrow bench, eyes narrowed, lips curled in something between a smirk and a snarl. I've lived in finer places, he muttered to himself, tracing a line in the dust with his fingertip. Outside the cell, Deputy Clive watched him like a hawk. Don't try anything. I heard stories about you, manipulating judges, bribing lawyers. Elijah didn't look up. I don't need to bribe anyone, he said. They come to me. Power attracts power, son. But for the first time in years, his words rang hollow. Yet, he wasn't done. Not yet. He waited until nightfall, when the guard changed, when the shadows lengthened like fingers across the stone floor, and then he pulled a tiny folded scrap from his boot heel. Carefully sealed. A mark pressed in red. Wax. He handed it to the quiet janitor sweeping the corridor. No one knows you work here, Elijah whispered. Deliver this to Lancaster. You know where. The janitor gave a slow nod and vanished into the dark. Elijah leaned back and smiled. Let them think it's over. Back in Willow Creek, Abigail sat alone in Micah's old study. The place still smelled like cedar and ink. His journal sat closed in her lap, the spine worn from the weight of truth. She had spent the last few nights combing through every page, every scribble, every margin note. She thought she knew everything, until now. She reached for the oil lamp, its flickering light catching a corner of the desk's underside where something thin was taped. She pulled it free. A sealed envelope, yellowed with time. Her name written in Micah's handwriting, Abigail. Only open if I don't come home. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside, a single page. If you're reading this, then Elijah has done what I feared. I never told you everything. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to live free of it. But now you must know. Elijah didn't come after me for land or money. He came because I knew who really gave the order that day in Wichita. It wasn't just about control of the valley. It was about erasing everyone who knew what happened to the Prescott family. Abigail, you must find the man named Lancaster. He carries the ledger Elijah buried years ago. It names the men who made the town bleed. And it names the one who still walks free. I'm sorry. I love you. Always. Micah. She read it 3 times, her breathing ragged. Micah hadn't just been a gentle man. He'd been a silent soldier, in a war no one knew was still being fought. She folded the letter with shaking fingers. Her gaze hardened. There was more work to be done. Across town, Daniel was fixing the church fence when Abigail rode up fast, eyes wide. I need you, she said, not dismounting. Now, he dropped the hammer. What's wrong? Elijah sent a message from jail, and Micah left me a name, Lancaster. Daniel paled. Lancaster? I thought he was dead. So did everyone else. Abigail looked down the long, empty road stretching east. But if Micah was right and Lancaster still has the ledger, then Elijah's conviction is just the beginning. The real monster hasn't even stepped into the light yet. Daniel grabbed his coat, holstered his Colt, and climbed into the saddle. Then we ride at dawn. That night, the stars over Willow. Creek burned cold and silent. Inside his cell, Elijah smiled as he imagined what would happen when Lancaster received his note. And far to the east, in a candlelit cabin no one dared approach, a man with a scar over one eye opened a sealed letter and whispered, "So, she knows." The road east of Willow Creek was colder than it should have been for spring. As dawn broke across the hills, Abigail rode with Daniel at her side, her mind racing faster than the hooves beneath her. She held Micah's letter against her chest, like armor. If Lancaster truly existed, if he held the ledger Micah mentioned, then Elijah Monroe was just the pawn in a much deeper game, and the real devil hadn't even blinked yet. They reached the edge of the Cheyenne Bluffs by mid-morning. And there, tucked between the rocks and pines, was the shack Micah had once mentioned only once, in a whisper after a nightmare. Abigail dismounted and approached slowly, boots crunching over gravel. She knocked. No answer, but the door creaked. Open. Inside sat a man with a white beard and a shotgun across his lap. One eye was clouded, the other sharp as a vulture's. "You, Abigail?" he asked. She nodded. He tossed a dust-covered book on the table. "Micah said you might come. He was a good man, braver than most." She opened the leather-bound ledger. It wasn't just names. It was the whole rotten skeleton of a forgotten war. Land deeds forged. Families burned off their farms. Payments made in gold bars by railroad barons and oil men. The Prescotts, the Donovans, even the Whitfields, all gone, all tied to one name, Senator Royce Branton. Elijah Monroe hadn't ordered Micah's death out of vengeance. He'd done it to protect the man who built the empire they all lived under. Abigail's throat tightened. This could burn it all down. Lancaster nodded. It should. 3 weeks later, a federal marshal read from the ledger in front of the state courthouse. Elijah Monroe's empire collapsed like dry timber. And Senator Branton? He disappeared before the first paper even hit the press. Some said he fled to Mexico. Others said he paid a double to take a bullet for him and vanished into the hills. No one knew for sure. But Abigail? She didn't care about catching ghosts. She returned to Willow Creek, quietly, like the dust settles after a storm. She sat on the porch of the old farmhouse, watching the horizon with her hands folded in her lap. Daniel came by with fresh nails, for the fence one evening. "You did it," he said. She smiled, faint but real. "We did. Micah would be proud." "I hope so." He looked at her. "What now?" She glanced at the sky. "I think I live. Really live." He offered his arm. She took it, not out of desperation, but as two people who'd both stood at the edge and chosen to turn back together. In a small jail cell in Cheyenne, Elijah Monroe stared at the ceiling. Everything was gone. His lawyers, his gold, his name. And still, he smiled, because in his mind, the game had only begun. Branton's. "Not the last," he whispered to the air, "just the biggest." Then he laughed, and far off in another town, under another name. A man with silver cufflinks opened a newspaper and read his own obituary. Then he lit a cigar. The smoke curled into the rafters like a promise yet to be fulfilled. Like this story? If this ending gave you chills, make sure to like, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe to Luminous Tales, जहां हर कहानी दिल, आंसुओं और ट्विस्ट से भरी होती है.